It's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is lift. Let's look at a few different meanings for this verb. The first is to raise to a higher position or level. A second way this verb gets used is to mean to pick up and move to a different position. So this action, lift, might be something you do many times throughout the day. You might think about lifting objects, or if you have a small child or a pet, you might also pick up and move your children or pets to a different position. Another meaning for lift is to encourage or raise a person's spirits. So it can have a really positive meaning as well. Lift might also mean to formally end a legal restriction, a decision, or a ban. So I've seen this word lift used to talk about the many restrictions that have been in various cities and states related to COVID-19. The final meaning that we're going to look at today of the verb lift is a bit of slang, and that slang means to steal. So if somebody asked if you lifted a car, for example, they probably don't mean pick it up, right? Because cars are very heavy, but instead they're asking if it was stolen. Lift is a regular verb. To make the progressive form, all we need to do is add ing to make lifting. The past tense and participle forms of this verb are made by adding ed. And because this verb ends with a T sound, the ed is going to make an id sound. Lifted, lifted. Let's take a look next at some phrasal verbs using lift. The first phrasal verb is lift off, and it means to rise from the ground or a launch pad, especially vertically. So vertically straight up. Here's an example sentence. SpaceX Falcon 9 lifted off at 3:20 p.m. So about a month ago, there was a space shuttle that went to the International Space Station. And so to describe its takeoff or its rise from the Earth into space, this phrasal verb lift off is used. Another phrasal verb you might hear is to lift something off, or you might hear it used to lift something off of. And if the of is there, then we're going to have another object that comes after that. This phrasal verb means to raise something, and you're raising something in order to uncover or release someone or something. Here's an example of that. She lifted the lid off of the pan to see what was for dinner. Another phrasal verb you might hear is lift up, and this can mean to move someone or something to a higher position. Here's an example of that. Charities have lifted up the most vulnerable members of our society. So this sentence might be speaking to poor individuals and the work charities do to move them up, maybe help them get a new job or help find housing, find food, etc. Today, we're going to practice using lift to express expectations. And there are many different types of expectations, and I think it's always good to have some examples. Sometimes our expectations are connected to rules. Here's an example of that. They are supposed to park over there. So there might be a rule, no parking in this spot, but over there, just fine. There are expectations related to customs. Here's an example of that. We are supposed to stand when the bride walks down the aisle. So this would be a custom for Western weddings. Another kind of expectation is a prediction. Here's an example of that. It's supposed to rain today. Sometimes expectations are connected to things that everyone says, some common beliefs. Here's an example of that. The beaches in Hawaii are supposed to be beautiful. Finally, we might have expectations that are connected to plans or arrangements. Here is an example of that. I'm supposed to pick up the package by 5 o'clock. So we're going to talk about expectations in the past, the present, and the future today, and we're going to use our verb of the day, lift, to do that. What you might have noticed from my previous examples is that to express an expectation, I'm using a form of be and supposed to, and then the base verb to share that idea. So to do this in the past tense, to talk about something we expected previously, we're going to use the past tense of be. So we'll use was or were, depending on our subject. Let's look at an affirmative example. The order was supposed to lift on June 30th, but the state extended it. So again, this could be referencing some of the rules we've had in place in terms of how many people can gather in a particular space or what type of businesses can operate. And so we had this past expectation. If I want to make my expectation negative, something I didn't think would happen, what I'm going to use is the past tense form of be and then not. You might also hear the contraction forms wasn't or weren't, and then we're going to follow that same pattern of supposed to and our base verb lift. Here's an example of that. They weren't supposed to lift heavy objects. Finally, if I want to make a yes or no question to ask about someone's expectations, I can start with my past form of be, then I'll have my subject, and then supposed to and the base verb. Here's an example of that. Was the state supposed to lift restrictions last week? Next, we're going to look at present and future expectations together. And the reason we're going to do that is they are formed in exactly the same way. So for both present and future, we're going to use a present form of be, am, is, or are, and then supposed to and our base verb. The reason that we'll be able to know something is future is because there will be a time signal. Now, the time signals won't be in every sentence you hear or you read. It might be implied based on the conversation and previous questions or statements that have expressed a future time period. So let's look at a present expectation in the affirmative. Adults are supposed to lift young children up and empower them. Okay, now let's look at our future expectation. The spacecraft is supposed to lift off Saturday afternoon. So, in case you're watching this on a Saturday, know that I recorded this video on a Wednesday, so Saturday is the future. Next, let's look at making negative sentences. This is going to be very similar to what we did in the past tense. We'll insert not right after our be verb. You might hear the contractions isn't or aren't, but there is no contraction with am. Here's a negative example. She isn't supposed to lift anything over 20 pounds. And in the future, I'm not supposed to lift weights tomorrow. So all of my negative examples here have been connected to the idea of picking up things that are heavy. And you might see this negative expectation either in the present or the future when it's connected to one's health or someone recovering from a surgery or other illness. Finally, let's look at making yes or no questions in the present and future. We're going to start with the present form of be, then our subject, then supposed to, and our base verb. Are you supposed to lift with your back? Right? That could be done in the present. And the answer to that question generally, no, you want to lift with your legs. And in the future, are we supposed to lift their spirits with cards and signs next week? So the next week is what's telling me it's the future. Now let's look at some words that are related to our verb lift. And the first is the noun form of this word. Exact same spelling, exact same pronunciation. And just like our verb, the noun can have several different meanings. The first meaning is the act of lifting. Let's look at an example sentence. The athletes attempted some heavy lifts. And one clue that might help me recognize that this is a noun and not being used as a verb here is I've got that adjective heavy right before it. That's a good clue that it's being used as a noun. This act of lifting and lift as a noun sometimes might be a shortened form for weight lift. You might just hear people kind of abbreviate it or shorten it down just to lift. Another meaning for the word lift is a free ride in another person's car or van or any type of automobile. Here's an example of that. Can you give me a lift? Right? Would be the same thing as saying, can you give me a ride? A third meaning for the noun lift is a device that's used for carrying people up or down a mountain. And I included a picture here so that you'd have something to see or maybe in mind. That's the particular device that's used. You can see the people sitting here and riding to the top of the mountain. Here is the noun form in a sentence. We took the lift to the top of the mountain. Finally, another meaning for this noun is a feeling of encouragement. Here's an example of that. My friend's thoughtful text gave me a lift. And again, the article off right before that is a good clue that it's a noun. Another related noun is a compound word, and it's going to be related to our phrasal verb that we discussed earlier. So this noun is lift off. And here it means the vertical takeoff of a rocket, or it could be a helicopter as well. Here's an example of that. The rocket booster came back down to Earth 8 minutes after liftoff. The last word I'm going to leave you with today is another noun. It's lifter, and that is someone or something that lifts or assists in lifting. And again, we might hear this as a shortened form for weight lifter. He's been a lifter for 40 years. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you'll try out using the word lift as you speak or as you write this week. Have a great day.